Yeah, so we can go ahead and get started.
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to introduce ourselves before we jump in here. My name is Horatio. I'm actually a nano degree grad. I graduated from the Android nano degree in September, and now I work as a course manager / Udacity coder at Udacity.
I am Rachel. Many of you may have worked with me on placement opportunities. I work with the careers team. I'm the career success strategist, pretty much a fancy word for a matchmaker. I came to Udacity from White Truffle, which is a recruiting platform that helped companies and candidates get matched based on skill sets. You might see some White Truffle information on Udacity site. We partnered together for a while. And we are here today to specifically give you some insight into what it's like to work with a recruiter and how it could benefit your job search. And so many of you guys had submitted questions when you signed up for the chat. So we'll be sure to touch on those after we kind of do a live Q&A. And then if any of you guys have questions relevant to what we're to chat them, submit them, let about it, and we'll make sure to address it. If you have just general overall questions, maybe we can wait till the end and we'll make sure to address them then if we have some time.
Yeah, so currently the feature is disabled now to ask questions right now, but we will be touching on those questions that you did submit in the surveys beforehand, and we'll also be touching on some other questions that we set up beforehand. But right now we're sort of debugging it so that you can ask questions live. So I was in this position not too long ago. So Rachel, can you tell me about who exactly recruiters are? Maybe who else do I need to be concerned at in like the hiring process?
Okay, so there are two different types of recruiters for the most part, internal and then external recruiters. So internal recruiters work for the company, and they are in charge of essentially hiring directly for that company. So Udacity itself has people who act as internal recruiters, helping the teams here at Udacity fill their open roles and make hires. There are also external recruiters, which are more like a third-party recruiter. They work for recruiting companies such as like Robert Half or Aerotech, or I can't think of any other names off the top of my head, but they essentially have companies that they work with to make placements, and then they also have a community of candidates that they pull from depending on the roles if needed. I worked for a recruiting company years ago, and so I have some insight into kind of how that functions, what those relationships are like. They can be really, we'll go into more detail later, but they can be beneficial. I know they get a bad rap, but they don't always have to. Outside of just who recruiters are, you might also hear people talk about a hiring manager. Hiring managers essentially are the ones who are in charge of posting the job, writing the job description, and they are typically the ones who make the hiring decision. Maybe your future boss, maybe not. Oftentimes hiring managers work with department leads to make the placements, and so they do work closely together. And then in the internal interview process, you also will typically be interviewed by interviewers who are team members. Typically the team you will actually be working with. So they'll ask you some questions. Sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's behavioral. It just depends on each company's internal process.
Right, that's awesome. So thanks for that, Rachel. So what are like some of the common mistakes people make when talking to recruiters that you just mentioned?
Well, first first mistake is entering into any conversation with a recruiter having a negative connotation or stigma attached to the conversation. Like I mentioned earlier, oftentimes, especially external recruiters, tend to get a bad rap. Sometimes it's warranted, but it doesn't always have to be. It often is a case-by-case basis for each person as an individual. But just common mistakes would be to put all of your eggs in their basket and assume that they're going to be the person to find you a job. And also, on the flip side of that is assuming they're not going to be able to find you a job. People tend to overlook recruiters or rely too heavily on them. Both are really negative. Both can be a detriment to your job search. if you rely on somebody else to find you a job, you might not find that job because you're at somebody else's mercy to make an assumption about what you want. You are your own best advocate in your job search, and you should use recruiters to help you build your network and get connected to companies, but you shouldn't rely on them to find you a job.
Okay, yeah, so that was really interesting, Rachel. So even before we were talking to recruiters, how do we get in touch with recruiters, and what is the best way to reach out to recruiters?
Yeah, so as far as like external recruiters go, looking into recruiting companies in particular can be helpful. So do some research into the company where recruiters work for. So like, for example, Robert Half or Airtech, like I mentioned earlier, look into them, read reviews on them, see what other people's experiences being a candidate for them was, and make your decision then. Typically people writing reviews, I have found, are the ones who have had bad experiences with recruiters because they're writing about what not to do. But with every what not to do or with every negative experience, there's a positive on the flip side. So really make your own impression or make your own opinion of them. For recruiting companies, you can actually apply directly to their open roles. You can apply directly to become one of their candidates, which means they will they'll take you into consideration as they get new roles in. And then with internal recruiters, there's a couple of different ways to connect with them. First would be applying directly for a job. They typically will then be the ones to reach out to you once they have gone through your resume and your application. And if they're interested in connecting with you, they'll schedule a call. You could also, that's like the most passive way to go about doing it. If you are really motivated to work for a specific company, like say, for example, you really wanted to get a job at Udacity. This is not necessarily how you would go about getting a job at Udacity. I'm just using it as a sample case. One way you could do it is to find their open roles on the company's website, and then go to LinkedIn, maybe try to find somebody who looks like either they'd work on that team or they'd be in charge as a hiring manager on that role specifically, and then connect with them and write them a message. Be really personable. Don't go straight into you want a job there, but get to know them and just reach out and say, I'm really interested in what your company's working on. I'd love to know more about the problems you're solving, and leave it at that. You never want to be too forward, especially when building connections. You kind of want to just leave it simple. Simple is always best, and just kind of wait to see what comes of it. You can also apply directly to that role. Sometimes having your name in different pots. So if you've applied directly and they see your name that way, and then you've also added them on LinkedIn, or somebody else might know you at that company, just word of mouth can help too. And it's kind of like meeting people and networking.
Okay, so there's all these different ways to reach out to recruiters, and you mentioned one platform is LinkedIn, and we could do different things to differentiate ourselves there. So what are other ways we could differentiate ourselves when talking to recruiters?
So having some sort of a presence on social media, I'll go back to LinkedIn, can help. If you are really active on LinkedIn and you're part of different groups and you participate and you post things that are relevant to either your industry or job search, it just helps to boost your name a little bit. Also, having a community of connections. I would caution you, though, to have a quality of connection over a quantity of connection. Some people tend to think that the number is all that matters when it comes to LinkedIn, and the more people you have, that's the biggest deal you can make, and it's not true. If you are connected with 500 people and none of them have anything to do with what your industry is, what types of jobs you're trying to get, or the field you're in, it's not helping you at all. The connections you have really should be about the type of role you're trying to get. It should be industry people, so you can bounce ideas off each other, share articles, connect. So building a connection on LinkedIn can be a way to differentiate yourself. Using other forms of social media can as well. I know it might sound crazy, but using social media platforms such as Facebook or Twitter in a professional capacity can also be helpful, because they're going to search you, and if they if your Facebook pops up or your Twitter feed pops up, depending on how in-depth of a recruiter or hiring manager they are, they might check that out. And if they see that you're not that you need to go and make all of your social media is like super professional now, that's not the case. But if you are choosing to not make them professional, make them private. Because if somebody's searching you and they find things you don't want them to see, it could be a detriment to your job search. But having a professional LinkedIn or having a Facebook or Twitter can help as well with posting professional articles, kind of like you would on LinkedIn. Same with Twitter, reposting things, following people in the industry. All of that helps build your brand. One last thing that I think people sometimes overlook because it tends to be very personal is blogging, talking about your professional journal or journey as kind of like an online journal, how you built products, how you solved questions, what types of challenges you overcame in your search to become a developer, is another layer. All of these things essentially are a supplement to the main forms of job searching, which is an application or a resume. So none of these replace a resume or an application, but they just can supplement them. They're a way for recruiters and people possibly looking at you to get a better sense of your skills, abilities, and who you are.
All right, yeah, that sounds really awesome. So now we know how to differentiate ourselves. So I'm in a nano degree right now, and maybe I just graduated, or I just really want to start looking for a job, really. What are some like the best practices I could follow when starting a job search? Like, how do I even know what companies I want to start at, right?
Yeah, oftentimes this is the hardest place to start in any job search, regardless of what type of job you're trying to get, regardless of the industry you're trying to get into or break into or get a start in. Figuring out how to start your job search can be an overwhelming place to start. And so giving some thought to trying to answer the following questions can be a helpful way to kind of like narrow in. These questions are location. So are you happy with where you're currently living? Are you looking to relocate? What does that geography look like for you? Industry. So within tech, there's a lot of like sub-industries like healthcare or finance or banking or education, fitness. There's nutrition, there's a ton. Pretty much anything you could think of, there's some sort of startup somewhere out there doing it. So giving some thought to, if you have a personal interest in something already, and you want to take that further into this next step of your career, really honing in on that can be helpful as well. Giving some thought to what type of company you want to work for. So size, what their personal values are, how they treat their employees, some of the perks and benefits that come attached to that role. So thinking about those types of questions and trying to come up with some sort of an answer can give you a place to start. You want to be careful not to limit yourself too much to only having like 2 different kinds of companies available to you, but it's mostly just a place to start. Sending out mass applications to companies that you're not passionate about or you have no interest in what their product is can show a little bit sometimes to hiring managers. They'll take a look at your resume and be like, I don't understand at all how this person fits into our jobs or what we're working on. So if there's something specific you're really wanting to do, or a background that you have that you're wanting to continue, but just now in a different capacity as a web developer, apply for those. And look into that and use that to start your search.
All right, so what if a recruiter reaches out to me with a job role?
Yeah, so if a recruiter reaches out to you with a job role, I would ask some questions as to what's expected of this job, where's it located, just general questions that you'd want to ask. And then just because a recruiter is reaching out to you doesn't mean you have to go or do anything with it if it's not something you're interested in. If you really are strongly like, nope, this is not for me, I don't care, this is nothing I want to work in, this is not a role I want, it's not located where I want, like you're more than welcome to turn it down. More will come. If you're being reached out by one recruiter, that means more have access to you and more can find you. I would, however, give some thought to possibly considering it only as practice to go through the process. Interview practice, especially if the technical interview is associated with their internal process. Getting some practice with this can be really beneficial. The last thing you want is to have an interview with a company you're stoked about and you really want to work for, and then you get to a technical interview and you don't even know what to do, you've never practiced one before, and you bomb it. So getting some practice under your belt, whether it's a technical interview or just a behavioral interview process in general can be not necessarily the most comfortable or fun experience to go through. So having some under your belt before you find like your dream job can just be helpful.
So I know like a resume is really important, but after I apply, like how important is the resume really to like the recruiter and the company?
Yeah, so a resume is hugely important. As somebody who has a recruiting background, if I was to get a resume in for a role I'm working on, and the resume either was not professional, wasn't formatted well, had super crazy grammar errors or spelling errors, they tend to not take it seriously, and you might get put in the dump bucket. Along with that, if you get a resume in and the content is good and there's no spelling errors, but it has nothing to do with the job you are trying to fill, you also won't be taken seriously. So being able to have a professional resume that is curated for the role you're looking for can be really helpful. So making a targeted resume for the company, for your specific role you're looking for, even going one step further and making it company specific or super role specific. So one example would be, say you have experience as a taxi driver and you are applying at Uber. You want to make sure that you list that because you have actual experience in the field they are in. Yes, you might be a junior web developer, but you have experience as a taxi driver, which ties into Uber's platform in general. So making it super company and super role specific can be helpful as well.
Yeah, so if I was applying at Facebook, I probably wouldn't put the same resume where I had that cab driving experience in the past.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Then if you're going that in depth with your resume and making it that targeted, you would want to then make the resume you send to Facebook more about like something specific to the role at Facebook. And one thing that can really help you is to find the job description that the company has posted and take some key terms and some of the roles and responsibilities and see how some of your past experience relates to that or yields to that, and then list that. Talk up your experience that relates to what they are looking for. It catches the eye of the recruiters, and it really can go a long way to showcase how you'd be a good fit for it. Instead of making the recruiter kind of like second guess how you'd be a good fit for it, you want it to be like clearly come across in your resume. Like, this is why I'm a good fit for this. This is what my experience is. This is how it yields to the role you're looking for. You want that to just come out of your resume without having to explicitly say it.
Yeah, so what if a candidate has some really impressive, maybe professional resume, but it might not even relate to the industry or the job title they're applying for? What do you recommend with that?
Yeah, so if you're trying to get your first job in this new industry, so you've taken your nano degree, you're trying to get, like, say your background, you came from a business analyst, and now you're trying to be a web developer. And you don't have a lot of tangible like industry experience to showcase, I would still list in a work history section, still list your professional experience, because oftentimes having professional experience can also speak a lot about who you are and who you are as an employee. Maybe just don't go into like really in-depth examples of what your roles and responsibilities were at your past companies. Just list that you were there, or the years worked, what your title was, and maybe like one line about what your role was. With this case, you'd want your projects and your experience that you'd asked in your education to really be the focal point of that resume. So they're just, different types of resumes for different types of experiences. As you get more industry experience, you can start to take away some of the less relatable professional experience and have your industry experience kind of speak for that. So as you get more opportunities to practice your skills and more job opportunities, your resume will kind of take shape and will slowly start to read more industry specific.
Yeah, so are there any like last minute tips you want to give to people that will be talking to recruiters and are doing a job search before we go into the questions that our students have sent in?
Yeah, mostly just kind of to summarize and to touch back on things. Really, you want to diversify yourself. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. You owe it to yourself to not settle for just one recruiter to help you. If you want to work with recruiters, work with multiple. Find yourself jobs along with them. Be careful with recruiters just in general. Like, don't sell yourself short, and don't buy into everything they say. They're trying to find the best candidate for their position. And obviously you're going to think you are the best candidate. The company might not agree. So don't necessarily like get yourself settled or set on a role that a recruiter is helping you with. You should still do your own search. You are your own best advocate. I think I said that earlier. And then this, in addition to not putting all of your eggs in one basket, like multiple search avenues and search paths can just help you stay fresh and keep your skills up. While you're searching for a job, don't let your skills go stagnant. The worst thing you can do is to focus all your attention on your job search and not pay any attention to keeping your projects up to date. Keep learning, keep practicing, because that can speak volumes. As you're applying to roles, keep yourself organized. So have some sort of a spreadsheet as to where you've applied, what the progress is, when you should check back in, what applications you sent out where your resume is at. Even if you end up doing a targeted resume, having like a folder designated specifically to resumes and title those resumes with the company names. That way you know that that's specifically that one, so you don't accidentally send out what you thought was your normal resume to a company and it has a bunch of company information in it. So that can just be just general best practices. And then also be persistent. I know job search in general can just be it can be overwhelming to get started with, and then it can be very discouraging if you get some negative feedback in the beginning. So don't get too caught up in that. Just let yourself just keep applying. The more you apply, the more experiences you get, the more opportunities you get to practice interviewing and coding challenges. And so just the more opportunities you put yourself out there, the better chances you have overall. So be persistent.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for that, Rachel. It's really informative, really great. So the next thing we're going to go to is for those of you that have taken the survey before we gave this webcast, we had a section where you could put any questions that you would like answered in the webcast. So I'm just going to, we're going to get to the ones that we felt like we related with the most, and then if we have time, we might be able to cover some more. So if your question doesn't get answered, we're sorry, but this is what you got. All right, so first question we have here is, how can I improve my skills to crack the coding interview? Any resources? So I was actually in a really similar situation. I just recently graduated from a nano degree, and I was like, I need to learn data structures and algorithms and be able to perform in a coding interview, in a technical interview, and do these things. And I was like wondering, where can I start? The first advice I would give is definitely don't give up, and like know that you can do it, because when you first start out, you might be like, wow, I wish I had a computer science degree, or I could have learned all of this. But the thing is, you can teach this stuff to yourself. You've gotten so far with the Udacity nano degree, so it certainly is possible. So just start Googling data structures. Check out books like Cracking the Coding Interview. What I would personally recommend is go to hackerrank.com and just start going through those problems. And then if you need to learn a data structure to solve a problem, go and Google that data structure, Google that algorithm, so you know how to solve the problem, right? And this gives you practice in that sort of situation. And then when you sort of feel like you understand data structures and you're ready to start practicing interviews before you're actually in an interview situation, there's a great website out there. It's called pramp.com, PRAMP.com. That's the name of the site. And what that allows you to do, it actually allows you to take turns interviewing a person, and then that person would interview you with coding and algorithm questions, right? So this is pretty, as close to real life as you're going to get, right? Because you have your webcam in front of you and you're speaking in front of this person and there's an online coder pad. And so you're really walking through the problem as you would in an interview. Have a person in front of you to tell you how you can get better and how you can get worse. And also it puts you in the shoes of the interviewer, right? So you could see things that maybe you wouldn't have noticed while you were doing it, but you could see somebody else do it. So that would be my answers to that. And yeah, just don't give up. So the next question we have is recruiters look at many profiles, people to identify potential candidates for specific positions. This is kind of a long question. Very often these positions belong to a specific department or team, for instance, database management systems, and it is possible that there are other departments and teams in that company that are more relevant to you, for instance, data analytics, mining, or some other data engineering. So my question is, how do you get the recruiter to review your profile and set up a call with someone from other departments that might be looking for a candidate with a profile similar to mine, and how do you stand out from others?
So there's two paths, I guess, that this would take. First is it depends on if the recruiter is an external recruiter working with a third-party company, or is from a third-party company, or is an internal recruiter. Easily, if you are applying, if you find this position and you're applying to it directly, if that's the scenario to which got you to this application, and that you see that there are multiple roles across different teams that you'd be a good fit for, apply to all of them. That's always a good idea. If you see multiple roles, don't pigeonhole yourself, just like don't, and put your eggs in many different baskets, essentially. And then, because what'll happen is if there are different recruiter, or hiring managers that are associated to each role, they will talk amongst themselves because they all work together. They will end up figuring out that they are all talking to the same person or interested in the same person, and can then work together to figure out which department you would actually be a good fit for. That happens a lot. I don't think you'd be surprised, or I mean, it might be surprising as to how often that actually happens, but never limit yourself. If you're interested in multiple different teams, apply to all of them. Now, if you're getting contacted directly from a hiring manager, from an external party, or even an internal party, and you have taken the time to get to know this company, and you've recognized that there's a lot of roles that they have open that you could possibly be a good fit for, and you're worried about not getting in touch with the right person for those, just ask. If it's an external recruiter, they might also be working on that role, or they might know somebody who is, or they might not have been aware that that position is open. And just ask and just tell them, hey, I noticed after you told me about this role, I looked up the company, I looked up their jobs, I noticed they also have these positions posted. Based on my experience, I think I'd be a good fit for them too. Who do I talk to? Can you make that introduction? And just ask. They're not going to be offended if you ask for that. They will get the referral bonus regardless of which job you get put into if the company hires you. That goes for external or for internal recruiters. It doesn't really matter as long as the company makes a hire. That's their biggest concern.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Rachel. So this was a question that's particularly curious. So how do you respond to the question, how much money do you earn? The student said that they usually reply with my target salary, or say something like, I want to earn the fair market value. So what is the best way to respond to that question from a recruiter?
Again, this is not as simple as one might think. Needed question. Nobody likes talking about money in general, and so it's uncomfortable anyway. So there are two different scenarios I am going to kind of talk through. First is the scenario where you have no work experience. You are entered. This would potentially be your first job in this new industry. You just got your minor degree. You're applying. They're potentially making you an offer, and they're asking you about what your current salary is, and you don't know how to answer that because you've never had a salary as a web developer before. One thing you should do is, prior to starting the interview process, or as you're engaged with it, as you have an interview with a company, look up what just the medium or market range salary is for people in your similar position, and just see what's out there. Depending on where you're located, it might differ greatly. So take that into consideration. There are using a site like Glassdoor can actually give you some specific information on what that specific company's salary range is. So you can kind of get, because even within the same market area, different companies are going to pay different amounts, depending on whether they're an established company, they have a bigger budget, versus a startup who might have a smaller budget. So getting specific information on what the company's salary ranges can help too. And then in addition to that, if you're making a career change and you were a senior level person prior, or you're a fresh college grad, there might be some differences in terms of what this new salary is going to be. So if you are a senior level person making a transition into a starting developer role, you might have to just accept the fact that you might have to take a bit of a pay cut just to get started. There is a lot of room for growth within tech, and so you could easily, within a year to 6 months, make up to what you were making prior, but you might have to bite the bullet and take a pay cut in the beginning. So really what you want to do is figure out how low you can go, or what your price range is for making what you can make and live comfortably where you're at. That might take some budgeting, that might take some really like deep diving into what you spend your money on and how you spend your money, but really take into consideration like what it would be to live comfortably, and then ask for that or a little bit more. That gives you some room for negotiation. What you want to know is where the lowest you can possibly go, because if they make you an offer and you negotiate, you know how low you can possibly go. Give yourself a buffer in that so you're not living on the streets. You never want to have to do that just to take on a job. That's like the worst case scenario. But just understand that within different market ranges and within different companies and different jobs even, there might be differences in salary. And just so do your research going into it. And then my next set of advice is somewhat similar, but if you already have industry experience, so say you have experience as you took pretty much your degree as just a way to kind of bolster your skills, or you have had a job and now you're getting your second job, and they ask you how much you're making, always ask for more, because that gives you room to negotiate. And because sometimes, depending on the company, they'll offer you what you say you're making now, and so if you've told them more, you have a buffer, and essentially you're making more, and you've kind of inadvertently gotten a raise with this new position. So salary negotiation in and of itself can be very tricky and an uncomfortable thing to do. The Career Resources Center that Udacity has created actually has a lot of resources on how to go through this and different scenarios and how to make the most of it, and how to really make sure you're not underselling yourself, or you're not preventing yourself from getting job opportunities because you've asked for too much. So it kind of walks through that. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you have kind of more specific questions regarding how to handle this, because it can be tricky.
Yeah, the Career Resource Center is really great. I personally used it a lot when I was looking for a job in technology. So it's a really awesome thing. Even that goes back to my question on how to crack the coding interview. There are a lot of resources there that will help you with that. But back to this question. So typically a recruiter might ask this like during the phone screening, right? So maybe like, would you recommend to a candidate that they could revisit this topic after they get an offer?
Yeah. So if you're talking to a recruiter, they will probably, especially if it's a recruiting company, they will probably ask you early on what your salary range is, just so that way they have an idea of what types of roles to present you for. Because they know that if they put you for a role and they know that the salary is way too low for what your range is, or it helps them kind of gear their search. So they will probably ask this early on. You are more than welcome to revisit a salary. As long as you haven't accepted an offer, you can revisit a salary. There are oftentimes things that come up that can change a salary range. If there's additional resources that's needed, or maybe this company can give you a certain a salary amount but can't provide any other benefits, you have to take that into consideration. That's oftentimes things you won't know until later on. As long as you haven't verbally or on paper accepted an offer, you can always revisit. And there are going to be situations where maybe you have accepted an offer and something unexpected has happened and you do need to revisit it. You can just be very careful about how you tread with that, because that can leave a bad taste in companies' mouth. But those are extenuating circumstances, and those are kind of like 1 in a million. So that we don't really need to get into too much detail with that. But yeah, just be open and honest. I have found, just from personal experience, like, the more honest you can be about what your needs are, the better. So if a relocation is needed, be upfront and honest about what it would take for you to move. If you need financial support, then say that. Be open and honest and ask questions about what the company is able to do for you as an employee, because that can sometimes impact salary as well. So say they have a really, really good benefits package, or they have all these other perks, like a free gym membership, they have a cell phone reimbursement, or they order lunch in every day, or they have free childcare on site. Like, all of those things can change the way you might think about a salary that might have been less than ideal. There have been many times where I've worked with somebody and the perks associated with the role has actually outweighed the less than ideal salary they were making, because they were actually going to be saving all this extra money on transportation expenses, or they got to work from home, so they didn't have to worry about coming to the office. Like, there are other perks and day-to-day benefits that can outweigh or can help impact a salary decision. So ask about those as well.
All right, yeah, so thanks for making that what could seem like a difficult question a lot easier for us. So the next question we have here is, a student wants to know, how can they market themselves with no related work experience? I know you kind of touched on this a little bit before.
Yeah, so we kind of went over this with the resume aspect, but the best thing you can do is just to showcase the skills and abilities that you do have. So you actually have all of these skills that you might not realize as experience. So personal projects count as work experience. When you're building a resume, or when you're building a portfolio, or you're building your LinkedIn, really talk up the experience you do have and let the experience you don't have kind of like fall to the back. You never want it to be obvious that you don't have a lot of experience. You want to talk up the projects you do have worked on. You want to talk up so like a great way to do so and to showcase that is to build a personal site, or build a personal portfolio that is essentially a website you are creating for yourself. You get to design it, you get to be the mastermind behind it, and it gets to allow the people who are looking at it snippets of who you are as a developer, what your abilities are. There have been times where these types of sites have turned into employment opportunities for like a contract role, because somebody sees their site and be like, can you design one for me? I'll pay you. And then you can list that on your resume, or link to that as an example of your work. And so the more experience you can get, even if it's not in a professional setting and it's just a fun project you're working on, or something you're developing on your own, or an app you put out, or a project you're working on with friends, hackathons you can attend and participate in, GitHubs you can do, anytime you can do that is building up your professional experience. So I know that how marketing yourself with what seems to be no experience can be a very daunting thing to do, but if you think about it, you actually probably, especially if you have graduated from Udacity, you do have projects to show for it, and you have work that you can showcase. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and another thing you could even do is with Udacity, if you graduated from your nano degree, you could even apply to be a code reviewer, and that's another excellent way to gain related work experience. Yeah. So the next question we have is, how to stick to my ideal job and not to be led by recruiters and still work smoothly with them? Yeah,
so just tips for working with recruiters. Just because they contact you about a job doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. Doesn't mean you have to consent to it. Doesn't mean you have to let them put you forward at all. If you like have a very clear vision as to what jobs you want and where you want to go with your career, and the job that this recruiter is talking to you about doesn't fit that path, then you can just say, I'm not interested at this time. You don't have to connect with them. You don't have to work with them. Oftentimes, though, if you are working with a recruiter, especially in a third-party setting, they will take the time to get to know what your motivations are and what interests you, what types of projects you'd want to work on, what types of companies you'd want to work for. If they're a good recruiter anyway, they will definitely take that into consideration. Because that just helps them in their search. So if you're not interested for whatever reason, you don't have to go with it. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are kind of new to the interviewing scene, I would possibly suggest doing it anyway, because it gives you experience on how to interview. And that can be invaluable in and of itself. Just the interview resources that Horatio talked about are great and will definitely help you, but nothing really beats face-to-face in a high-pressure situation when you're interviewing for an actual job and a job's on the line. Even if a job you don't want, like, you still get the pressure of it. And so nothing can replace that type of feeling. So practicing using these jobs that you have no interest in as simply practice can just maybe help you later down the road.
Yeah, and even if you get the job and offer on the table, never hurts, right?
Yeah, you don't have to take it. Just because you get an offer doesn't mean you have to take the job. If you get 2 offers, that can help with, salary negotiation. You can use one to leverage the other. So yeah, just it never hurts to say no.
All right. So Rachel, that looks like all of the questions that we planned on answering that got sent in. Do you think we have any time for any more here?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah, so we have a few here. What we originally planned to do was actually answer some of your questions live, but it looks like there's an issue with that right now. But for the next year webcast, we promise to have that working.
And also, just to note, if you guys have any questions that about content that we brought up or we talked about, and because we can't answer them now live, feel free to email me or Horatio, and we can figure out who would be the best person to answer the question, depending on what the question is. So at the end, actually, I guess we can give our email addresses out now.
Well, if you just email Udacity-support, they'll get sent to the best person, right?
Yeah,
so.
And just mention Webcast follow-up, so that way they know it goes to you. Otherwise it could go to anybody.
Right. So which one of these questions looks good to you, Rachel?
Okay, so this is one that I personally have had to deal with. So how to answer the question, why do you change jobs so often, once in a year? So I myself, over the last 2 years, have changed jobs maybe 4 times, just because opportunities presented themselves and I took it. And it's not a negative to change jobs, especially in this ever-changing startup scene, if that's kind of what you're trying to get into. Tons of jobs one will become another. You'll meet somebody here that will offer you this. As long as the jobs you are jumping to fit your career path, that's all that really matters. And if oftentimes people who take on contract work deal with this as well, because it appears on a resume that they've had 6 jobs in the last year, because each one have been short-term contracts. And if you just say upfront that that's the situation, that's totally fine. Even in my case, where I've just taken on new opportunities, none of them have been for very long for one reason or another. You can just be honest and say that, and just explain, how you got started, what the transition was, what led you onto the next job. And you can just say the difference is, though, if you are getting fired from all these jobs, and that's why there's so much turnover, you might want to rethink what you're doing in these jobs to get you fired. But typically that's not the case. Typically it's because an opportunity lends themselves, or you're moving, or whatever the situation is. Just be honest about it. Recruiters are smart. We tend to have a very good read on people, and so we can, especially if you've been doing this for long enough, you can tell when people aren't being truthful and something shady is going on. So it's always better to be honest and just explain what happened and what the situation was and why you made a change, and that's usually my best advice for that.
All right, yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. Is there anything else that you see?
Okay, so how do I get employers to get past the no degree? This person has GitHub and projects. So I think this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of how to market yourself with no experience. So just don't focus yourself on the fact that you don't have a CS degree. You have Udacity and a degree, which in and of itself is starting to gain more traction and is starting to, just like other boot camp and immersion programs, kind of take the place of CS degrees. And that shouldn't be, if you feel like that's holding you back, I think that that's a you thing, not necessarily a recruiter thing. Just because a job post or a job requirement list that you see lists specific types of actual, like, either education experience or like how many years worked in a situation, that's oftentimes a wish list, but it's oftentimes not who the company is actually hiring. So don't ever feel like you can't apply to a position just because you don't hit every notch on the list. You should still apply. There oftentimes is a big discrepancy between the job posts and who's actually getting hired. For one reason or another, companies will oftentimes totally be willing to hire capable people regardless of what their background is. And within tech itself, recently, especially with medium to smaller size companies, there's a recognition that a CS degree or a college degree doesn't mean anything. There's a difference in what you're learning in a CS setting versus what you're learning in a nano degree setting, in terms of the actual tangible hands-on work experience on projects. And so as long as you showcase the experience you do have and don't showcase the experience you don't have, you'll be okay.
Yeah, for a lot of our nano degrees, they're taught in subjects that some universities don't even offer classes in, right? So you might be even more qualified than somebody who has a CS degree to be an Android developer because you took our nano degree, right? So make sure to mention that and really showcase your projects.
Yeah.
So Rachel, is there anything else?
Let's see. Most of the other questions that have been submitted, we've covered in some capacity, so I don't feel like we need to keep retouching on it. Okay, there's one more I will touch on. It says how to bypass recruiters and go directly to the company which has the opening. So in all honesty, you're going to end up working with a recruiter because the person handling it, even if you go directly to a company, the person receiving your application is going to be your recruiter, just an internal recruiter. So you're still going to have to deal with them in some way. So you might just need to kind of get over that a little bit. They're not as scary as they have to be. And just yeah. There might be some situations if you're working with a super small company that there's not going to be a recruiter because they don't have an HR setup. So you might then, in those cases, talk to somebody who's more engaged with the actual engineering or a CTO, CEO type person. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah, but by all means, if you know somebody in a company and you could get an internal referral, definitely do that, right? But you probably will get sent to a recruiter eventually. So yeah, that was really great. It was really great having you here today, Rachel. I don't know about you, but I sure learned a lot today. A lot of great things. So yeah, thanks again, Rachel.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and let us know. We'll probably next week send out a list or a survey or a simple questionnaire to all the people who attended or said they were going to attend, just with follow-up information about how you think it went, what you would have liked to see, maybe possible future topics. So keep that in mind as you're reviewing this and as you're thinking back on today and what was talked about and what you would like to see for next time.
Yeah, it would be really awesome to get your guys' feedback.
Yeah.
All right, that's it.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.